Have you ever discovered that the person you trust most in the world has been systematically destroying your life for money? What I'm about to share with you will make you question everything you thought you knew about family loyalty and unconditional love. This is my story, the story of Rosalind Washington, a 64-year-old woman who discovered that her own daughter had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to steal not just my money, but my entire identity, my dignity, and nearly my sanity. But what I uncovered goes far beyond simple greed. It reveals how far someone can go when they see their own mother not as a human being, but as an obstacle to their ambitions. I worked my entire life as a nurse in Chicago's public hospitals. 42 years of night shifts, double shifts, holidays away from family, all so I could provide the best possible future for my only daughter, Keisha. Every dollar saved, every sacrifice made, every dream postponed, all had a single purpose: to ensure that Keisha would never face the financial struggles that I had endured in my youth. At 64, I finally felt I could rest. My modest but comfortable house in the South Side was paid off. I had a decent pension, and most importantly, I had raised a daughter who seemed to have become a successful, independent woman. Keisha worked as a marketing executive at a prestigious firm downtown, lived in an upscale apartment in Lincoln Park, and drove a car that cost more than I had earned in 2 years. But what I didn't know was that behind this facade of success lay a web of lies so complex and cruel that when the truth finally came to light, it nearly destroyed me. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was having my usual breakfast of coffee and toast when my phone rang. It was my bank, calling to inform me that my account had been overdrawn. Impossible, I thought. I kept meticulous records of my finances. Every penny was accounted for, every expense carefully planned. I had never, in my entire life, overdrawn my account. When I arrived at the bank, the manager, Mr. Patterson, a kind man who had known me for 15 years, showed me the statements with a worried expression. There were withdrawals I had never made, transfers to accounts I had never opened, and most disturbing of all, changes to my account that required my physical presence and identification. Someone had been accessing my account regularly for months, and they knew exactly how to do it without raising immediate suspicion. But the financial irregularities were just the beginning. Over the following weeks, I began receiving bills for services I had never requested, medical appointments I had never scheduled, insurance policies I had never signed, and most confusing of all, legal documents related to property transactions I knew nothing about. It was as if someone was systematically taking control of every aspect of my financial life. The confusion turned to fear when I tried to access my online banking and discovered that my passwords had been changed. My phone calls to customer service were met with the explanation that the changes had been made in person, by me, with proper identification. But I knew I had never made those changes. Someone with access to my personal information, someone who knew me well enough to convincingly impersonate me, was systematically taking control of my life. Sleep became impossible. I would lie awake at night, my mind racing through possibilities. Who could have such detailed access to my personal information? Who knew me well enough to forge my signature, to know my social security number, my mother's maiden name, all the security questions that banks and institutions used to verify identity? The list of people with that level of access was terrifyingly short. But what truly terrified me was not the financial loss, although that was devastating enough. It was the feeling that I was losing my grip on reality. Every day brought new evidence that decisions were being made in my name, that my identity was being used by someone else, and that my own memory of events was being called into question. Was I forgetting things? Was age affecting me more than I wanted to admit? The doubt was almost worse than the theft. The breakthrough came on a Thursday afternoon when I decided to visit Keisha at her office unannounced. I wanted to talk to my daughter, to get advice on how to handle the identity theft, to find comfort in the one person I trusted completely. But when I arrived at the prestigious building in downtown Chicago, the receptionist looked at me with confusion. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we don't have anyone named Keisha Washington working here," the young woman said politely. "Are you sure you have the right company?" I felt the world spinning around me. For 3 years, Keisha had been telling me about her job at this marketing firm, describing her colleagues, her projects, her successes and challenges. She had even attended what she said was a company Christmas party, showing me photos of herself with people she claimed were her co-workers. How could she not work there? Desperate for answers, I decided to follow the trail of lies. I went to the apartment building where Keisha claimed to live, only to discover that the apartment was rented under a different name entirely. The elegant car that Keisha drove belonged to someone else, someone who had reported it stolen 6 months earlier. Every single aspect of Keisha's supposed successful life was a carefully constructed lie, but the most shocking discovery was yet to come. When I returned home that evening, emotionally devastated and physically exhausted, I found Keisha waiting for me in the living room. But this was not the composed, successful daughter I thought I knew. This was a stranger with my daughter's face, sitting casually on my sofa as if she owned the place. "We need to talk, Mama," Keisha said, but her voice was cold, calculating, completely different from the warm, loving tone I had known all her life. "I think you've been asking too many questions lately, and that's going to have to stop." What happened next left me speechless. Keisha rose slowly from the sofa, and for the first time in my life, I felt afraid of my own daughter. It wasn't just the coldness in her eyes. It was something deeper, something that suggested that the person I thought I had raised and loved had never really existed. "Do you want to know the truth, Mama?" she continued, walking around the room as if she were inspecting a property she was considering buying. "The truth is that you've been far too naive for far too long, too trusting, too available." Keisha stopped in front of the fireplace where I kept photos of our family, photos of her graduation, birthdays, moments I thought had been happy for both of us. She picked up one of the photos and examined it with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of contempt and something that looked almost like pity. "Do you know how many years I spent planning this?" she asked, still holding the photograph. "Since I was 16 and realized that you were never going to give me the life I deserved. You were always too cautious, too conservative with money. I watched my friends get new cars, designer clothes, trips to Europe, and what did I get? Lectures about financial responsibility and the importance of saving for the future." My legs began to shake. I sat heavily in the armchair that had been my favorite for years, but suddenly it seemed to belong to someone else, to another world. "Keisha, what are you saying? I worked double shifts to give you everything?" "Everything?" She laughed, but it was a harsh sound, devoid of joy. "Mama, you gave me the basics: food, shelter, public education. That's not everything. That's the minimum any mother should do. But I always knew you had more saved up, much more. And I decided it was time to start enjoying my inheritance while I was still young enough to appreciate it." The pieces began falling into place in my mind like a macabre puzzle. The accesses to my bank account, the password changes, the mysterious legal documents. You were the one who stole my money?" "Stealing is such a strong word," Keisha replied, placing the photo back on the fireplace with a delicacy that contrasted brutally with her words. "I prefer to think of it as an advance. Eventually, all of this would be mine anyway, wouldn't it?" I just decided to accelerate the timeline. The shock was giving way to anger, an anger I had never felt in my entire life. "How did you get access to my accounts? How did you—" "Mama, do you really think it was difficult?" she interrupted me. "You keep all your important information in that shoebox in your closet, your passwords written on little pieces of paper, your social security number, copies of important documents. I memorized all of that when I was 17. And as for the signature, well, you had me sign so many birthday cards and school documents over the years that I learned to mimic your handwriting perfectly. Every word was a stab wound. This person was not my daughter. She couldn't be. The Keisha I knew was gentle, caring, grateful for the sacrifices I had made. This cold, calculating creature was a stranger wearing my daughter's face. "And your job? The apartment? The car?" My voice came out as a whisper. "The job never existed," she said with a casual shrug, as if she were discussing the weather. "It was easier to invent a successful career than to actually build one." "The apartment? I rent it for a few hours when I need to impress someone or take photos for social media. The car is borrowed from a friend who has several questionable properties. But with the money I've borrowed from you, soon I'll be able to have my own real apartment." The magnitude of the betrayal was beginning to form completely in my mind. How long has this been happening?" "Officially, about 2 years, she replied, sitting down again, this time in my favorite armchair, forcing me to move to the sofa. It was a small gesture but symbolically powerful. She was literally taking my place in my own home. But actually, I've been preparing for this much longer, studying you, learning your habits, your fears, your weaknesses. My weaknesses. The words came out louder than I intended. Your desperate need to be a good mother, she explained, with the patience of someone teaching a child. Your tendency to believe the best in people, especially in me. Your reluctance to confront uncomfortable situations. Your age, which makes people automatically assume you might be confused or forgetful when you question strange bank transactions. What she said next chilled me to the bone. I also studied how to do this without leaving significant legal traces. Most of the money was transferred through methods that technically don't constitute theft in the traditional legal sense. Temporary power of attorney, signatures on documents you supposedly signed, loans in your name using your excellent credit score. I knew I needed to stop this conversation, call the police, do something, but part of me still couldn't accept that this was really happening. Keisha, why are you telling me all of this? Why not just keep hiding it? She smiled then, and it was the most terrifying smile I had ever seen. Because we've reached a point where I need your active cooperation, Mama. And because you started asking too many questions, investigating too much, it was better to be honest now and negotiate terms than to risk you discovering everything on your own and making things complicated. But if you think you've heard the worst part of the story, you're very wrong. What Keisha revealed to me next about her future plans for my life was so shocking that I had to grab the arm of the sofa to keep from fainting. And the most frightening thing of all? She had documents, forged signatures, and a legal plan that could leave me completely defenseless. If this story is touching something deep within you, if you're recognizing patterns of manipulation or deception in your own lives, please hit that subscribe button right now. Stories like mine need to be shared because they serve as warnings for all of us. I want to hear your comments too. Have you ever experienced something similar? How did you deal with betrayal from someone close to you? Cooperation? I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible in the suffocating silence of my own living room. What kind of cooperation? Keisha reached into her purse, a designer bag I now realized had been purchased with my own money, and pulled out a thick manila folder. The way she handled it, with such care and confidence, told me she had been planning this moment for a very long time. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears as she opened the folder and began laying documents across my coffee table with the precision of a lawyer presenting a case. These, Mama, are the documents that are going to secure both of our futures, she said, her voice taking on an almost businesslike tone that was more terrifying than her earlier coldness. Power of attorney forms, medical directives, property transfer papers, and something very special. A psychological evaluation report that suggests you're beginning to show signs of dementia and can no longer handle your own affairs. The words hit me like physical blows. I leaned forward to look at the papers spread across my table, and what I saw made my blood freeze. My signature was on every single document, perfect forgeries that even I might have believed were real if I hadn't known I never signed them. But it was the medical report that truly terrified me. Detailed observations of my supposed memory lapses, confusion about financial matters, and recommendations for supervised care. This is impossible, I breathed, picking up the psychological evaluation with trembling hands. I've never seen this doctor. Dr. Richardson? I don't know anyone by that name. Of course you don't, Keisha replied with that same terrifying smile. Dr. Richardson is a friend of mine who owes me several favors. He was very understanding when I explained your situation, how you've been becoming increasingly forgetful and paranoid, making wild accusations about missing money and identity theft. He agreed that it would be tragic if you were left to struggle alone with these symptoms. The room started spinning around me. Keisha, this is fraud. This is elder abuse. This could send you to prison for years. Only if someone reports it, she said calmly. And who's going to believe a confused elderly woman with documented dementia over her loving, successful daughter who's just trying to take care of her mother's best interests? I stared at her in horror as the full scope of her plan became clear. You're going to have me declared incompetent. Not declared, Mama. You already are, according to these documents. The power of attorney has been in effect for 3 months already, which is how I've been able to access your accounts legally. The property transfer papers will ensure that this house is protected in a trust that I manage, and the medical directives give me the authority to make all healthcare decisions on your behalf." She leaned back in my chair, looking completely relaxed, as if discussing what to have for dinner. "Now, here's where the cooperation comes in. You can make this easy on both of us by accepting the new arrangement. You'll continue to live here, of course, but I'll handle all the finances, all the decisions. You'll have everything you need: food, shelter, medical care. But you won't have to worry about all those complicated financial matters that have been causing you so much stress." "And if I refuse?" I asked, though I was terrified of the answer. "If you refuse, things become much more institutional. The medical report includes recommendations for supervised care facilities for patients who become agitated or resistant to family assistance. There are some very nice places where they specialize in caring for elderly people with your condition. Not luxurious, but safe and secure." The threat hung in the air between us like poison. She was offering me the choice between being a prisoner in my own home or being locked away in some facility where no one would ever believe my stories about being manipulated by my own daughter. "How long have you been forging my signature on these documents?" I asked, desperately trying to understand the timeline of this nightmare. "The initial power of attorney was signed about 6 months ago, during what the records show was a lucid moment when you realized you needed help managing your affairs. The property transfers were more recent, about 2 months ago, when your condition began to deteriorate more rapidly. And the medical evaluation was just completed last week, which is why I felt it was time to have this conversation. Every word was calculated, every detail planned. She had been living a double life, not just to steal my money, but to systematically strip away every aspect of my independence and autonomy. What about my friends, my neighbors? Mrs. Henderson next door has known me for 20 years. She'll know something is wrong." "Mrs. Henderson?" Keisha laughed. "You mean the sweet old lady who's been so concerned about your recent behavior? She's already spoken to Dr. Richardson about the strange things you've been saying, how you've been accusing people of stealing from you, how confused you seem about simple things. She was actually relieved when I told her I was stepping in to help." My heart sank as I realized how thorough Keisha's manipulation had been. She hadn't just been stealing my money and forging documents. She had been systematically destroying my credibility with everyone who might have helped me. Every conversation I'd had with neighbors about the strange financial activities, every question I'd asked about missing money, every expression of confusion, it had all been twisted into evidence of my supposed mental decline. "You've been planning this for years," I said, and it wasn't a question. "Since I was in college and realized that most of my friends were going to inherit significant wealth from their families, while I was going to inherit a modest house and whatever was left of a nurse's pension. It wasn't fair, Mama. You had the opportunity to build real wealth, to invest, to create something substantial for the next generation. Instead, you chose security over growth, caution over opportunity. So I decided to correct that mistake." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood I had called home for 30 years. "Do you know what this house is worth now? What your pension and savings could become with proper management? We're talking about nearly $500,000 in total assets, Mama. That's enough to secure both of our futures if it's handled correctly." "Both of our futures?" I repeated incredulously. "Of course, I'm not heartless. You'll be taken care of for the rest of your life. You'll have everything you need. The only difference is that I'll be making the decisions about how the money is spent, and I'll be able to use the resources to build something bigger, something that will benefit both of us in the long run." The casual way she discussed stealing my life savings while pretending it was for my own good was perhaps the most chilling aspect of this entire nightmare. She genuinely seemed to believe that she was doing something reasonable, even admirable. "And what if I go to the police right now?" I asked, though my voice lacked conviction even to my own ears. "With what evidence?" she replied, turning back to me with that patient smile. "You'd be a confused elderly woman with documented dementia making wild accusations against her devoted daughter. I have medical records, legal documents, and witness statements from neighbors and healthcare providers. You have paranoid delusions about missing money and conspiracy theories about identity theft." She walked back to the coffee table and began collecting the documents, handling each one as if it were precious. "Besides, even if somehow someone believed you initially, how long do you think it would take for Dr. Richardson to testify about your deteriorating mental state? How long before Mrs. Henderson and others describe your recent erratic behavior? The case would be closed within a week, and you'd find yourself in mandatory psychiatric evaluation. The trap was perfect. Every avenue of escape had been anticipated and blocked. Every person who might have helped me had been turned against me through careful manipulation of my own legitimate concerns about the financial irregularities. There is one more thing, Keisha said, pausing in her document collection. I need you to sign a few additional papers tonight. Updates to the medical directives, some insurance beneficiary changes, and a formal statement acknowledging that you've been having memory and confusion issues and that you're grateful for my assistance. She placed a pen on the table next to a fresh set of documents. These are just formalities, really. The important decisions have already been made, but having your signature on these will make everything much smoother going forward. I looked at the pen lying on the table like a weapon pointed at my heart. Signing those papers would be the final step in my own destruction, the last act of cooperation in my daughter's scheme to steal my life. But refusing to sign would trigger the nuclear option, institutionalization, and complete loss of any remaining freedom. I need time to think, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. Of course, Mama, Keisha replied, but there was steel beneath her understanding tone. Take all the time you need, but I should mention that Dr. Richardson has scheduled a follow-up evaluation for Monday. Depending on how that goes, he may need to update his recommendations about your living situation. It would be unfortunate if you were deemed too unstable to remain in your own home. The threat was clear. Sign the papers or face involuntary commitment within days. As Keisha gathered her things and prepared to leave, she paused at the door and looked back at me with an expression that might have been mistaken for concern if I hadn't known better. I want you to understand, Mama, that this isn't personal. I don't hate you. I don't want to hurt you. I just refuse to wait decades for an inheritance that should be working for me now, while I'm young enough to use it to build something meaningful. This way, we both benefit. You get security and care, and I get the resources to create the life I was meant to have. After she left, I sat in the darkened living room for hours, staring at the documents she had left behind. The evidence of my own powerlessness was spread across my coffee table like tarot cards, predicting a future I couldn't escape. But somewhere in the depths of my despair, a spark of anger was beginning to kindle. My daughter might have planned this perfectly, but she had made one critical error. She had underestimated her mother's capacity for survival. I want to pause here because what happens next is crucial, and I need you to understand something important. If you're watching this and thinking about elderly relatives in your own life, pay attention to the warning signs. Financial irregularities, personality changes, isolation from friends and community. These can all be indicators of elder abuse. Please share this video with others who need to see it. Your engagement and comments help these stories reach people who desperately need this information. But my story is far from over. What Keisha didn't know was that her old mother had learned a few things about survival during 42 years of working in inner-city hospitals. And sometimes, when you're pushed into a corner with no way out, you discover strengths you never knew you had. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee that grew cold in my hands, staring out at the empty street and thinking about 42 years of working in Chicago's public hospitals. 42 years of seeing people at their worst and their best, of learning who could be trusted and who couldn't, of developing instincts that had kept me alive through gang wars, drug epidemics, and budget cuts that left us understaffed and overwhelmed. Keisha thought she knew her mother, but she had forgotten something important. You don't survive 4 decades in emergency medicine without learning how to think under pressure, how to spot lies, and how to fight back when everything seems hopeless. By sunrise, I had a plan. The first thing I did was call in sick to my part-time job at the clinic. I told them I had the flu and needed a few days off, which bought me time without raising suspicions. Then I walked to the public library 6 blocks from my house, a route I had taken countless times over the years, but never with such purpose. At the library, I used one of their computers to do something Keisha never expected her technologically challenged mother to do. I began documenting everything. I created a new email account she didn't know about and started writing detailed accounts of every conversation we'd had, every document she'd shown me, every threat she'd made. I included dates, times, and exact quotes as best I could remember them. But documentation wasn't enough. I needed proof, and I knew exactly how to get it. During my years in the hospital, I had learned that the most dangerous people are often the most overconfident. They make mistakes because they believe they're smarter than everyone around them. Keisha had made the mistake of thinking I was helpless, confused, and isolated. She was wrong on all 3 counts. I spent that first day making phone calls from the library's payphones, using the old-fashioned method of communication that Keisha would never think to monitor. I called the real Dr. Richardson, whose name she had forged on my psychological evaluation. When I explained the situation, he was outraged and immediately agreed to provide documentation that he had never examined me. I called the bank and asked for records of every transaction on my account for the past year, which they agreed to mail to a post office box I rented under my maiden name. I called the apartment building where Keisha claimed to live and confirmed that no one by her name had ever been a tenant there. Most importantly, I called Detective Maria Santos, a police officer I had worked with many times during my hospital years. Maria had brought victims of domestic violence to our emergency room, and we had developed a mutual respect over the years. When I explained what was happening, she didn't dismiss me as a confused elderly woman. She listened, took notes, and agreed to help me build a case. "Rosalind," she said during our phone conversation, "what your daughter is doing is called financial elder abuse, and it's a felony. But you're right that we need solid evidence. The documents she's shown you, the forged signatures, the fake medical evaluation, all of that is criminal. We just need to catch her in the act." That's when I came up with the most dangerous part of my plan. I was going to give Keisha exactly what she wanted, my cooperation, while secretly recording every word she said. Detective Santos helped me obtain a small recording device, the kind used in domestic violence cases where victims need to gather evidence of their abuser's threats. It was tiny, easily concealed, and could record for hours. She also helped me understand my legal rights and confirmed that recording conversations in my own home was perfectly legal in Illinois. On Saturday morning, exactly 3 days after Keisha's revelation, I called her and told her I was ready to sign the papers. "I've been thinking about what you said, baby," I told her, injecting my voice with the kind of weary resignation she would expect. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I am getting too old to handle all these complicated financial matters. If you think it's best," I could hear the satisfaction in her voice when she agreed to come over that afternoon to finalize everything. She had no idea that Detective Santos was parked 2 blocks away, ready to move in as soon as I gave the signal. When Keisha arrived, she was in an excellent mood. She had brought a bottle of expensive champagne and a bouquet of flowers, as if we were celebrating something wonderful instead of the theft of my life savings and independence. "I'm so proud of you, Mama," she said, setting up the documents on my dining room table with practiced efficiency. "This is the right decision for both of us. You're going to be so much happier when you don't have to worry about all these details anymore." The recording device was hidden in my blouse pocket, capturing every word. As she walked me through each document, explaining what I was signing away, I asked questions that drew her into revealing more details about her scheme. "Now this paper here," she said, pointing to a property transfer form, "this just ensures that if anything happens to you, the house won't get tied up in probate. It'll be available immediately to pay for your care." "And you'll be the one managing that?" I asked innocently. "Of course. I've already been handling your finances for months anyway. This just makes it official and legal." "What about the money you've already taken from my account?" I pressed. "How much was that exactly?" She paused, pen in hand, and for a moment I thought she might suspect something, but her arrogance won out over her caution. "About 47,000 so far," she said casually. "I know that sounds like a lot, but most of it went towards setting up the legal framework for your care, paying Dr. Richardson for his evaluation, and covering my expenses while I took time off work to handle your affairs." "Time off work?" I repeated. "But I thought you said you never actually had a job." She laughed, apparently finding my confusion amusing rather than suspicious. "Right. I forgot you knew about that now. Well, let's just say it went toward my general living expenses while I focused on taking care of your situation. The important thing is that it was all necessary to protect your interests." Every word was being captured on the recording device. Every admission, every casual reference to theft and fraud, every detail of her elaborate scheme to steal my life. But she wasn't done revealing the full scope of her plans. "Once these papers are signed," she continued, "I'll be able to access your pension directly, which will make everything much more efficient. and I've already been in contact with a financial advisor who can help us maximize the return on your assets. Your conservative approach to money has been holding back your wealth for years. What kind of returns are we talking about? I asked. Well, with proper investment, we could potentially double your assets within 5 years. Of course, that would involve some risk, but at your age, we need to think about maximizing growth for the next generation. The next generation. She was talking about gambling with my life savings while pretending it was for my benefit. The anger I had been suppressing for days began to boil over, but I forced myself to remain calm. I needed her to finish incriminating herself before I revealed my hand. There's just one thing I'm confused about, I said, picking up the pen she had placed beside the documents. If all of this is legal and above board, why did you have to lie about your job and your apartment? Why all the deception? For the first time, her confident demeanor flickered slightly. It was easier than explaining the complicated nature of what I was doing. You wouldn't have understood the financial and legal aspects of asset management and elder care planning. The story about the marketing job was simpler. Simpler than the truth? Mama, you're overthinking this, she said, but I could hear an edge of impatience creeping into her voice. The important thing is that we're here now, making the right decisions for your future. Are you going to sign these papers or not? This was the moment. I put down the pen and looked directly into her eyes. No, Keisha, I'm not going to sign anything, and you're not going to steal another penny from me. Her expression changed instantly from patient condescension to cold fury. Mama, you don't have a choice here. We've been through this. You can cooperate or you can spend your final years in a psychiatric facility. Those are your only options. Actually, I said, reaching into my pocket and pulling out the recording device, I have a third option. I can have you arrested for elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and theft. The color drained from her face as she stared at the small device in my hand. You were recording me? Every word, I confirmed, including your admission that you've stolen $47,000 from my accounts, your confession about forging legal documents, and your threats to have me committed to a psychiatric facility if I didn't cooperate with your scheme. She lunged for the recorder, but I was ready for that. I pressed the button on my phone that sent a pre-written text message to Detective Santos. Come now. You can't use that, Keisha said, her voice rising to a near shriek. I'm your daughter. You can't send your own daughter to prison. You're not my daughter, I replied, and for the first time in days, I felt completely calm. My daughter was kind and loving and grateful for the sacrifices I made for her. You're a stranger who stole my daughter's face and used it to rob me blind. The front door opened and Detective Santos entered with 2 uniformed officers. Keisha's face went through a rapid series of expressions: shock, denial, rage, and finally calculation as she tried to figure out one last angle. Officers, she said, switching to her most professional voice, I'm glad you're here. My mother has been having severe mental health episodes, and she's become paranoid and delusional. I've been trying to help her, but she's become convinced that I'm trying to steal from her. I have documentation from her doctor that she's developing dementia. Detective Santos pulled out her own recording device. Ma'am, we've been listening to your conversation for the past 20 minutes. We have your confession to multiple felonies. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back. The look of absolute shock on Keisha's face when she realized that her perfect plan had been completely dismantled would have been satisfying if it weren't so tragic. This was still my daughter, still the baby I had carried and raised and loved with everything I had. As they placed the handcuffs on her wrists, she looked at me with pure hatred. You'll never prove anything. I'll say you coerced me, that you set me up. Who's going to believe a confused old woman over her successful daughter? The 47 people who are going to testify against you, Detective Santos replied calmly. Bank employees, the real doctor, Richardson, handwriting experts who will analyze your forgeries, and the financial investigators who are already tracing the money you stole. This isn't going to be a difficult case to prove. After they took Keisha away, I sat in my living room, surrounded by the scattered legal documents that represented her attempt to steal my life. The silence was profound, but it wasn't the oppressive silence of fear and helplessness that had filled my house for weeks. It was the silence of freedom. The aftermath was both simpler and more complicated than I had expected. The legal system moved quickly once they had evidence of elder abuse. Keisha was charged with multiple felonies and, unable to make bail, remained in jail awaiting trial. The bank froze all transactions related to my accounts and began the process of recovering the stolen funds. The forged documents were declared invalid, and my legal rights were fully restored. But the emotional aftermath was far more complex. This wasn't just about money or legal documents. This was about discovering that the person I loved most in the world had been systematically destroying me for years, had been studying my weaknesses and exploiting my trust with the cold calculation of a professional criminal. During the investigation, more details emerged about the extent of Keisha's deception. She had been living this double life for nearly 3 years, not 2 as she had claimed. The apartment she occasionally rented belonged to a man she had been seeing, someone who was also under investigation for financial crimes. The car she drove had indeed been stolen, but not recently. It had been part of an elaborate car theft and insurance fraud ring. Most shocking of all, I discovered that I wasn't her first victim. Keisha had previously targeted an elderly man she had met through online dating, convincing him to give her access to his finances before disappearing with nearly $30,000. She had also attempted to defraud her college roommate's grandmother, though that scheme had been discovered before any money was stolen. My daughter wasn't just someone who had made desperate choices under financial pressure. She was someone who had made a career out of exploiting vulnerable people, and I had simply been her most accessible and trusting target. The trial lasted 6 days. I testified about the months of financial irregularities, the fake job and apartment, the forged documents and threats. Detective Santos played the recordings of Keisha's confessions. Bank officials detailed the methods used to access my accounts. The real Dr. Richardson testified about the forged psychological evaluation. Keisha's defense attorney tried to argue that she had genuinely believed she was helping me, that her actions were motivated by concern for my welfare rather than greed. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the pattern of previous victims made it clear that this was calculated predatory behavior, not misguided family concern. She was sentenced to 8 years in prison for elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and theft. As they led her away after sentencing, she looked back at me one final time. But instead of hatred or anger, what I saw in her eyes was something that looked almost like surprise, as if she still couldn't quite believe that her perfect plan had failed so completely. 6 months later, I received a letter from her in prison. It was 3 pages long, handwritten on institutional stationery. She wrote about how sorry she was, how she had never intended to hurt me, how the pressure of trying to live up to my expectations had driven her to make terrible choices. She wrote about wanting to make amends, about hoping we could rebuild our relationship when she was released. I read the letter twice, then put it in a drawer with all the other documents from this nightmare. I never responded, and I never will. The woman who wrote that letter might share DNA with the daughter I raised, but she was still a stranger to me, still someone who saw remorse and rehabilitation as just another angle to work, just another way to manipulate emotions for personal gain. Today, 18 months after this nightmare began, I live quietly in my house in the south side of Chicago. The money Keisha stole has been mostly recovered, though the legal fees and emotional costs will never be fully repaid. I've returned to work part-time at the clinic, not because I need the money, but because I need the purpose and the reminder that there are still people in the world worth helping. I've also become involved with an organization that educates families about elder abuse and financial exploitation. I speak at community centers and senior facilities, sharing my story and teaching people to recognize the warning signs I missed for so long. Every month, I hear from people who say my story helped them protect themselves or their loved ones from similar schemes. The hardest part isn't the money or the legal complications or even the violation of trust. The hardest part is grief. I'm grieving the daughter I thought I had, the relationship I thought we shared, the future I thought we would have together. That loss is permanent and complete in a way that feels different from any other kind of grief I've experienced. But I've also discovered something I didn't expect. In fighting back against Keisha's scheme, in refusing to be a victim, in finding the strength to expose her crimes and protect myself, I found parts of myself I had forgotten existed. The woman who survived 42 years in inner-city emergency rooms wasn't gone. She was just sleeping, waiting for the moment when she would be needed again. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, investigate. When someone's story doesn't add up, ask questions. When you're being pressured to make major decisions quickly, slow down and seek independent advice. And remember that the people who exploit our trust often count on our reluctance to believe that someone we love could hurt us so deliberately. Before I close, I want you to know that sharing this story with you has been part of my healing process. If it's helped even one person recognize the signs of financial elder abuse or given someone the courage to fight back against manipulation, then something good has come from this nightmare. Please share this video with others who might need to hear it, and let me know in the comments if you've had similar experiences. We protect each other by speaking truth about the ways people can hurt us. I'm still here, still fighting, still surviving, and if you're facing something similar, you can survive it too. You're stronger than you think, smarter than they believe, and you deserve better than to be anyone's victim, even if that person shares your blood.